So I'm going to kick off the conversation with Amir. Amir, what do you, what do you, I mean, what do you think the impact of digital health communication can be on reducing the health burden? I know it's a bit of a sweeping question, but will increasing digitization reduce pressure on the healthcare system?
So actually, that is where I was thinking of what I was going to answer Parul with. Parul, there are there are three or four issues that I want to highlight. The first is that digital technology or digital access to healthcare removes enormous amount of stigma. That's the first point. We discovered that long ago when Narayan Murthy had once said that his driver would constantly go to the ATM every day. So he would ask him, why do you go to the ATM? You never went to the bank so often. He said, sir, the ATM doesn't look at me look down at me when I go and withdraw 100 rupees. The cashier does. And that's the issue with healthcare. When I go and approach a doctor, I'm very skeptical. Will this doctor laugh at me? Will she rebuke me for my sanitary habits, for my looks, for my clothes? But when I am across on the phone, and we discovered that we did a lot of work in Bihar for maternal health, and we realized how much women were happier contacting us on simple IVR phones. So that's the first point. It's really digital access is much more about hesitancy, about stigma, than it is about reaching the last mile, which is something that we have read about and talked about for decades now. The second thing about access to digital health is that it takes away this huge problem we have of forcing doctors to go to rural areas. Every now and then you say some smart alec health minister comes and says that I'm going to make it mandatory for doctors to go and do rural health before they get their degrees. I mean, this mandatory stuff doesn't work. You will just have lesser doctors coming in. And now what is happening is you can get access to the best doctors available online. We did that in Rajasthan in another intervention to great advantage, to great effect. And that is the second thing from the supply side. So the first was really a demand side issue. You're increasing demand by giving people access over internet and over telephone. And here you're supplying doctors by giving doctors access through internet and mobile and so on. The third thing that it does is that it is so much more efficient. See, the problem with a healthcare market is that a healthcare market doesn't have timings. Unlike other thing, unlike me when I teach, I have a timing. I don't teach before 9 o'clock and I don't teach after 9 o'clock. But healthcare requires a doctor to be available all the time, and very often you find that patients suffer because they suffer accidents over the weekend, or fall down partying on a Saturday and can't get a doctor. So that is I mean, that was a aside to some of us, but that's the real case, that you have maximum fatalities happening over weekends. One, because one is irresponsible, but also because doctors are not available. So that's the third point that I wanted to make. And the final point that I want to make is a gender issue. And the gender point is that we have done there is now enough literature that shows how women adapt to digital technology much faster than men do. Across technologies. We've done that with weavers, we've done that with artisans, we've seen that in healthcare, we've seen that in education. And given the fact that access to health and education, and this is something that I would point all of you to the UNDP's Human Development Report, you find that if you look at India's poor indicators, there are several that leave you disappointed. But the one that really shocks us is the fact that we are among the most unequal in terms of access to education and healthcare in the world. And that inequality has a very strong gender component. And if the digital divide gets conquered and women get digitally empowered, then we are tackling that pernicious issue that cannot be tackled by other policy measures. So those are the 4 points I want to make, Parul. Thanks for asking this question.
Amit, that was, I think you just hit the nail on the head, and I want to come back to you with more questions on how does how will this reduce? You already mentioned a very important point: the stigma of going into a doctor and not having him look down upon you, and maybe even if you're well educated or come across as somebody from the so-called upper strata, many times women are ignored. Their problems are not taken as seriously, so that happens very often. So I'd just like to bring in at this point Rajiv Sikka sir, because I think it's a great segue to Medanta at this point, because Medanta, in fact, they're dealing they're dealing with all these issues every day. So welcome, Rajiv. Rajiv, as you all know, is the head of information technology at Medanta. And personally, Rajiv, I've had occasion to use the Medanta booking app, and it's very smooth and fabulous. And I must say, as a user, I found it very, very helpful. So, Rajiv, my first question for you is that how did you ensure that the connection with the patient remains positive, especially in hospital like Medanta, which puts in so much effort into getting feedback from the patients and treating them as a valuable stakeholder? What has been the experience like post-COVID to maintain this trust?
Sure. So you rightly said that healthcare is a trust business. It's a word of mouth, and there are times when a roadside panwala will tell you that this doctor is better than the other doctor, and probably you glue to that doctor. So that's the state of affair as far as trust is concerned in the healthcare. So in a typical tertiary care hospital like Medanta, there are more than 170 plus touch points in a classical, traditional and digital channel between a patient and the hospital. When I say hospital, it starts even before someone becomes a patient of the hospital. Someone started looking into the website, finding out the doctors. So we realized that, to have this, trust, you have to have personalized experience in this 170 touch points to the extent possible. And there could not be better alternative mechanism than to bring digital intervention into this channel. As rightly said by Amir, I'm also of the same view that, ATM is far more better than the teller, because ATM doesn't make a distinction whether you are wearing a suit or we are wearing a short, whether you are withdrawing 100 rupees or a 10,000 rupees from the ATM machine. And the teller story, whosoever is of my age group must have seen a teller in a bank. So that's what the digital is all about, to bring that trust element. I'll give you an example. I was on an operational study tour in one of the leading hospitals in the Western countries, among the top 5 in the world. So we were just talking, and somebody said that, there is always a trust factor. We don't know what could be the hygiene of the hospital. And it was like, we were shocked because it hit us. We realized that, we are probably one of the most clean, it's like a 5-star property equivalent. And somebody is telling that God knows what kind of hospital would be that. So we realized that let's bring a, element of transparency, which is nothing but derivative of trust, by bringing a 3D tour of the hospital on the website. So if you go to Medanta website, you'll see a 3D tour. How my MRI, machine will look like. How do you enter into the MRI? How a room will look like. How the OTs look like. Okay, so that's one simple example of bringing trust. If somebody, I think Ganesh talked about patient advocacy and patient education in a tertiary care hospital where some of the diseases are almost non-curable, or it's like terminal diseases. So how do you bring trust? If your doctor is going to talk about it, it is not going to help. So you bring fellow patients who have gone through the similar experience, how the journey was, and then we make sure that they connect to each other, and that's how one more element of trust comes into picture. You took an example of booking an appointment into Medanta, and we all know that getting a doctor time is very, very difficult, and more so in Medanta. So what we have is that a simple mechanism. If you know the doctor name, it's like a book my show kind equivalent. You book the slot. If you don't know the doctor name, you know the specialty, you know the treatment, you know the disease, you know the plan. Because sometimes, it's a tertiary care hospital, you come for a second opinion or a third opinion. You have taken first opinion from a doctor and second opinion from Google, then you come to Medanta. Okay. So in this particular case, you just want to know that cyber knife. So you are aware of your disease, you are aware of the a possible line of treatment, but you now want to go for one more level, which is a robotic equivalent of your treatment. So all of these permutation combination will lead to some doctors, okay, and you can book the appointment then and itself. Then we realize that some elderly people, because generally 50 plus is the age group which Medanta has most of the patient. WhatsApp is a more and better customized experience. So we have a WhatsApp. You can book straightforward an appointment on WhatsApp in 1 minute. You'll get a link also. It will give you alternative doctors. It will give you alternative locations. It will give you a payment link. So within one straight 60 seconds, you have each and every formality done. You can prepay it also. So you don't have to stay in the queue as far as you land in Medanta. So this is one example. 6-7 years back when I landed in healthcare, this is my first exposure of healthcare. Somebody asked me, build a digital strategy for Medanta. I said, I don't understand digital, I don't understand strategy, and combined together is a bouncer for me. So let's understand that, what a patient want when he or she reaches a hospital like Medanta. So you come in an OPD, you come into a daycare, you come in an emergency, or you get discharged from a hospital. So whatever reports, bundle of papers, discharge notes, prescription you carry, we were of the strong view that you should have it in this mobile hand. And why it is? Because it will make sure that, like 5 years back when Government of India launched mobile portability, you were not captive of any service provider. So we thought that let's bring doctor portability or hospital portability into the hands of the consumer, in this case patient. So that's what it is. So you have all your reports in this. God forbid, if you're traveling and you have some setback, you can be in any city, in any location, and have all your reports in a handheld device. So that's what we bring. So right from looking for a doctor, looking for an appointment, getting reports, knowing about a disease, knowing about a treatment, each and everything is digital, and that's the only way by which you can scale it to large extent and large population base. So this is my, I'll take a pause here, and this is my view of how do you bring trust into a patient journey in a typical tertiary care hospital.
Thank you so much, Rajiv. I'll come back to you for further questions. I am aware that you have a limited time with us today, but I'll come back to you. I'm going to now bring in Richa and then Neha and then Ritika. Neha, I think, Richa, from what Mr. Sikka has said, I think it's natural to ask you because you're the ones actually dealing with people and consumers and their point of view. Do you find that COVID has made people more accepting or more woke about seeking the right health information?
I think it's not just woke, it's become more like a compulsion for them. Because COVID has for the first time brought in a lot of anxieties for anyone, like anyone who's even a part of the panel right now or watching this. We've become very anxious as an individual because we need information. And that's also because a lot of it is on the go, right? Like we're still discovering COVID as we speak, even the scientists and the doctors. And we also want to be part of that story. So for example, some of the bigger things that we started noticing in our community that was being talked about is the distinction between a common allergy and COVID. I mean, who would have thought that that would be the first pain point that somebody would bring up? That, I have pollen allergies, which manifest symptoms very similar to COVID. And how do I make that distinction? So these kinds of I think concerns have led to people making this this is more like a compulsion now. You cannot step out of your house. And I agree, you're going to be judged by family, friends, including all doctors that you have, that, you're being hypochondriac and this is not COVID and that is not COVID. But truth of the matter is that when your throat hurts at 12 a.m. in the night, you are scared. So, I think at that moment, the first touch base that you have is the online information flows. And that cycle over the last 18 months of the pandemic has been a revelation for even us, who've been into this space for quite some time. I've been working on pharma campaigns for almost 6 years now. And yet the kind of a pivot, I would say, that I have seen is something else. People are just about wanting to participate and engage on anything that is about physical well-being or understanding therapies, even rare diseases for that matter. So I feel that's everything that's just being talked about has led to this behavior, that we don't want to be judged. Our smartphones are the most private conversation that we can have about our well-being. My Google searches, of course, open to a lot of tech companies as data, but is not open to my husband or is not open to my family members. That, what am I searching? What are my midnight thoughts looking like? And then there are obviously, amazing tech integrations like what Medanta has done in terms of booking, etc. That just become the next step for me. If I have discovered something, or if I am curious about having a conversation with a doctor as a second leg, that comes in, and this curiosity or this anxiety has really changed the course of communications today.
Thank you, Richa. A follow-up question for you before I go to Neha and Ritika. What are the channels that patients, potential patients, or consumers, health consumers are using? Preeti, may I ask you to mute yourself, please? What are the channels of communication that people are using to seek this information?
So, it is still Google. I believe that yes, there has been a rise of this whole influencers are important, and what are they speaking and how they're talking is of course extremely important in funneling the right information. But even today, the first touch point is Google, which is why we at BlogChatter completely believe that more than influencers, having bloggers to talk about pharma or any evolved industry, we're talking about pharma, but say something even like finance for that matter, where there's a sense of responsibility in the conversation that is required. Even today, blogs form the crux. And then, yes, the social media part or the influencers and, their platforms help in amplifying or aiding the conversation. But even today, if I were to ask you, when you are scared or when you want to find about something, or, you need that extra information, will you go and find that influencer and see what they've spoken? No. Your first initial jerk reaction would be that you would key in those words in Google. And then one of those posts would be of a certain blogger or a doctor blogger or somebody who's had long form content on websites. And that comes out. So I feel even today, the primary behavior is still centered on Google. Yes, completely amplified and, I would say accelerated by social media platforms and how the influencers are using it.
Thanks so much, Richa, for that very clearly put viewpoint. It's Papa Google who is at the top, and the various offsprings of Google then amplify and give you. And then there is the black sheep WhatsApp who gives you a lot of scary information as well.
Yes.
So that is.
But Google has recognized it. So if you look at Google's strategy, they've taken pharma as a very important, aspect of their strategy right now. I had mentioned even when I was sharing the quotes with you that, 10 billion search results are related to health. And can you believe it? 10%, they equate 10% of the total searches that Google receives. So it is there. I hate to use the word, but it might become a cash cow for them. So they are very well aware that, pharma is the space where a lot of digital chatter is happening right now.
That's great insight. And just the scale of that is mind-boggling. Just 10% and those numbers. Thanks for sharing that, which are really insightful. I'd like to go over to Neha now. Neha, one of my questions is the questions of training. In our discussion so far, we've talked about the stigma of patients going into a big hospital. We've talked about the stigma of COVID itself. COVID itself creates a lot of stigma, and people look down on you that wherever you're traveling, you must have been careless, blah, 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 blah. There's a sheer scale of Google search results, which Richa talked about. What Mr. Sikka talked about, the portability of the hospital in your pocket, which is not just now, but a 5-6 years phenomena, but has really, accelerated post-COVID. So keeping all these in mind, Neha, I'd just like to bring you in on the training aspect of doctors. Training can't stop. So could you share your views on that?
Absolutely, Parul. And like you said, training can't stop. And while a lot of people on a lighter note have this perception that, he's become a doctor and he's now just practicing, that's not the case. Doctors are constantly learning. They have their CMEs, they need to get their credit points, etc. So they're always learning on the go. And before COVID, learning and socializing would all happen together. We'd have these symposiums, we'd have conferences across the globe or in the country, we'd have roundtable meets, etc. And that's where companies like medtech companies like us, or even peer-to-peer learning. So there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning as well in the community. Not just us, not just the medical device industry coming in, but also physicians getting together with each other. So all of that also, forms the training aspect, and all of that would happen in a physical space. But with COVID coming in, I'd say the physician community, has been very welcoming in adapting to the change. We did have our own thoughts on how would they do it, but I think it's not very smooth, but it's happened extremely well. And it's happened in different phases. So for example, if I look at peer-to-peer learning, physicians have actually been able to convert their physical meetings into hybrid models. We're having these virtual webinars. So webinars was like a craze that happened in 2020. I mean, every time you'd open up internet, there's one webinar happening from one pharma company, from one medtech company, but learning continued. So a lot of things became totally virtual, and a lot of things became hybrid. Hybrid in the sense you would have very minimum physical presence, but the concept of live streaming really pumped up. So now we've been able to have take a smaller room with just a couple of people who are teaching something, and you're able to live stream it to different corners of the world. So that's one of the way through which training has not stopped. Coming to industry partners like us, we deal with devices that are extremely complex, and for a physician to be operating them, we have a very strong sales force that constantly supports these physicians. And in a usual scenario, the sales force always bees with the physician in the cath lab when a case is going on. But when COVID struck, this was a huge issue. But we were very strongly able to do this entire thing through a lot of virtual trainings, be it WhatsApp phone calls or Zoom calls or FaceTimes, and through all that, our sales staff was actually able to impart knowledge and give instructions, tell the physician on what you should do now, how can things happen. It's obviously not as smooth as it would have been in a physical space, but it didn't disrupt. It did not create any errors or any issues in the process of learning. And virtually, the support that the sales staff has been able to give to the physicians to ensure that there is no problem in patient care has been extremely phenomenal in the last year. And we're still continuing to do so. And it's actually now, made the physician also realize that you don't need to always call the rep in. Even now, if the rep is in a remote area, he can still support me. So that knowledge was not there. Up till last year, it was always like, if a physician needed help, they'd say, please come over to the cath lab. They wouldn't even want to discuss on the phone because they thought it's always face-to-face, But this thought process has changed, and the adoption to virtual learning has come in, and it's going wonderful.
Just one more follow-up question before I bring in Ritika for her insights. Neha, do you think that the shift towards online training also means that there is some amount of monitoring at home as well happening? So what is your view on the growth and impact of that trend? Monitoring at home. So many of us would never even have an oximeter. Now we not only have an oximeter, a blood pressure machine, and some of us have even bought those EKG machines off the internet. So,
right.
So given all that, do you think that this will finally have a positive effect on the healthcare burden?
Absolutely, Parul. And I think to a certain extent, it is good that as patients, people are they're being more aware of the fact that they should have some monitoring devices at home. But they also need to know when is it enough, and they need to go to the doctor, which is like the most important aspect of all of this. Monitoring is good because you can keep a check on yourself, because I'll tell you of the experience that we've seen, majority of the visits at the hospital of patients are for follow-ups rather than new patients. We'd say I think Pikasa would also agree to the point. We have a lot of follow-up patients coming in at the hospitals rather than the new patients. And all of that follow-up is because the patient feels that, I'm a high blood pressure patient and check karna hai, so we'll go to the doctor and do it. But now because if you have the device at home, you can actually keep a check of yourself at home and reduce the burden that's happening there in the OPDs and in the hospitals, and actually keep a check on yourself. And only when you know that something is going out of hand is when you can schedule a doctor visit. So this whole thought wasn't there. Yes, sir.
So,
Yeah,
no,
you
go
said
ahead,
it
go
very
ahead.
right, Parul. Just let me add to what
Sure,
Neha
sure.
said. Absolutely on dot. So now, just imagine that 10, 15 years back, who could have imagined that aqua check or blood sugar, instruments were there at home. I do remember for my mom, and he used to say, who's going to do this? And now she do it regularly, 3 times a
Exactly.
day, 5 days. Now, I'll give you another example. And this is not about the cost part. This is how do you ensure that prevention is there. Industry is moving towards prevention because we can't sustain the gap which is there between the demand and the supply in a correction mode. We have to have a preventive mode. Now, what I mean by preventive mode, unless you measure it, you can't control it. And so measurement is important. That's the basic principle of maths and science, which we have, heard right from the day one. The other stuff which, which is catching up, and you also mentioned, is that there are ECG machines which are like so accurate. It's a 6 leads ECG, which is in some cases works almost like a 12-lead ECG. And in a typical traditional ECG, it's a very cumbersome process. You remove your shirt, a man has a lot of hairs on the chest, and then it becomes cumbersome. Now, these ECG machines measure your complete rhythm in sharp 30 seconds. And in a hospital like Medanta, if it is through Medanta partner ecosystem, ECG comes to Medanta doctor, and it is manned, or manned is the wrong word. It is managed by someone which is a cardiologist 24/7. Within 30 minutes, cardiologist will let you know 3 possible actions. Rush to an emergency wherever you can. Don't worry, it's normal. Third is that there is something. Why don't you come to OPD tomorrow and meet your cardiologist? So just imagine, and trust me, your neighborhood doctors, either pre-COVID or during COVID, doesn't have capability to do an ECG, and forget about reading an ECG. Okay, so you need a cardiologist to read an ECG, and few of us not even. And being a typical cardiac disease capital and diabetes capital of the world, we need to have such kind of mechanisms in place, and some of these devices and measurements will play an important role in ensuring preventive healthcare for the country.
Thank you, Sikka sir. That is really nice and very, very interesting insight. Home monitoring is for prevention and for knowing how serious the issue is. But like Neha also said, you need to know when you really need to go to the hospital. That's also important. I'd like to bring in Ritika. We've had some wonderful insights from our panel. But what does it actually mean when you have to communicate all this information, which involves both science and emotions, as Ritika had said? What does it mean for authentic and trustworthy storytelling? Ritika.
Absolutely, Parul. I think, there were some very good points made, Dr. Amir just mentioned that, women are adapting to digital platforms. Neha mentioned that, patients are becoming more comfortable with the idea of, real-time monitoring at home. Mrs. Sikka also elaborated about, the patient experience. So essentially, patient experience is absolutely defined by trust, when it comes, to adoption of, the virtual ecosystem of information that we have built over the last 18 months. And it was, when the COVID actually happened, it took all of us by surprise. And at that time, we were all in a state of, a state of panic, and we did not know that, how elective surgeries could happen, how we could actually, be safe when we go to a hospital. But eventually, there was information that was, talked about by, virtual healthcare, online consultations, telehealth. So I would say that we need to take the patient, we need to take people on a journey with us for any kind of communication, which, has 3 stages. Of course, awareness, adoption, and leading to preference. And, trust is the most important factor that will drive preference, that will drive behavior change. In healthcare, the most important thing is behavior change. And how in these 18 months, today we say that, digitization is the future of health. I would say that this was not something we could have said, 18 months ago, because, we were still exploring, and it was, the pandemic has actually acted as a catalyst. But still today we are, just on the surface of it. There is much more to digitization that has to happen, but there is a trend. There is, greater acceptance of the virtual systems, amongst the patient. So as a storyteller, we just need to understand that our information needs to be much more factual, yes, led by evidence, and it needs to be relatable. Something that the patient, the caregiver, the healthcare consumer can relate with and can absorb. It while it is dealing with science, it also needs to be empathetic. It needs to have that resilience. And I think that is the change that has happened. Today, we can see, so many videos. We can see, communication through infographics. We can see listicles happening, more snackable content happening. And I think that is the future of storytelling in healthcare, which is both science led, but is also looking at the human side of, healthcare and using very, very innovative formats.
Thanks, Ritika. I have one more question for you before I bring in Richa first again. Ritika, what is your opinion about the spread of fake news which can happen? Because you have the anti-vaxxers, you have the pro-vaxxers, you have all kinds of ridiculous, recently Nicki Minaj, the rapper, she posted a tweet that her cousin's friend became impotent after taking the vaccine shot, and that became world news. You had the White House saying, "We'll call you and explain," and they're only doing that because of how influential she is. So how do you deal? It's not just fake news; it's a highly irresponsible celebrity who has over 20 million followers who said something so ridiculous. So, what is your opinion on that?
No, absolutely. In fact, there's a saying that, acting on wrong information can kill. WHO has actually stated that the pandemic is accompanied by an infodemic. And this is so true. If you look at India, talking about the vaccine itself, in a country like India, where vaccine hesitancy has always existed. Zooming into the pandemic, where vaccine is a very, very important weapon to contain the spread of the pandemic and, to come back to normalcy, any kind of fake information around that has actually slowed the process. And we could see that, there is a lot of fake information happening regarding, the side effects of the vaccine, the efficacy of the vaccine. So here again, trust, plays a very, very important role. In fact, in India, there more than 67% of the news is, health related. It is doing the rounds on all kinds of social media platforms. If you will see during the pandemic, while there was a celebrity that actually played a role in making some misinformation spread like wildfire, we have had influencers and celebrities going out and asking people to not kind of consume information that is wrong, to not believe in information that is not authenticated, that is not backed by a resource. So I do feel that in healthcare, and especially in context of the pandemic, fake information can be really, really hazardous, because it can actually alter the patient behavior, to public health interventions. Trust again, they will not trust what the government is actually doing or how effective the vaccine is. And therefore, the response to the public health interventions will also, slow down. So I do feel that, fake information is something that needs to be addressed. In fact, WHO has done a lot. They recently did, with the UK government, they did this campaign called Stop the Spread. There have been messages doing the round that, you shouldn't, kind of do forwards or, just go ahead and make information that you don't have a source with. So I think that, there is much more that needs to be done. So in a viral ecosystem, of information, we really need to be aware of fake news. In fact, in media, we have, several, journalists who are actually talking about, busting, fake information. We have specialized media agencies, like Boom Live, and, we have veteran journalists who have actually taken up the case and talking more about it.
Thank you so much, Ritika. I'd like to bring in Sikar sir for one last comment. He's just told me that he has a hard stop, and hospital never stops, especially one like Vedanta. So I'd just like, one final comment from you before you leave us, Sikha sir, that what do you think, like Ritika said, digital is the future of health communication. Uh, uh, would you be able to identify for us one big trend for digital communication for hospitals such as yours? Already talked about explaining, the routines, the experiences of a hospital so the patient is ensured. What do you think would be the most important thing?
So if I think all the speakers talked about that there are behavioral changes which is happening in the patient, and we could have never imagined that
Yeah.
18 months back, right from telemedicines to care away from the hospital. So one very clear-cut message, especially for a tertiary care hospital, which is so big, which has invested so much in the infrastructure, one message is very clear, and it's very ironical that in future we have to have care away from the hospital. Just imagine that after building such a large infrastructure, now we are building ourselves for care away from the hospital, because Neha also mentioned, Richa also mentioned, and before that Vinesh also mentioned that bring patient whenever it is required, otherwise manage it remotely. And in these 18 months, patient also have realized that care can be given away from the hospital, and especially for follow-up patient. And follow-up patients includes mainly diabetic, chronic disease management, neuro, and cardiac. So that's the major load, and we have been able to manage. So this is one message. So what it means is that we have to have a communication mechanism in place, and that communication, when you talk remote, you just translate and say it's a digital. Now in this particular case, when Government of India came out that patient can be treated at home with minimum symptoms and asymptomatic and stuff like that, within 48 hours we were ready. And at that time, trust me, we went to local district magistrate, civil hospitals. What is the meaning of remote care? Nobody was aware of it. But within 48 hours, we realized that it has to be a mix of digital and personal communication. So we came out of the form. Patient was having oximeters and other stuff, but they were feeding it into a form. As soon as those stuff were below or below a threshold or above a threshold, alert used to go to a doctor, and doctor used to pick up the phone and call. So doctor is only treating someone out of which are at 20% of the patient through connect. Otherwise, each and everything is normal. If each and everything is normal, nurse is calling the patient twice in a day. Don't worry, things are okay. And that's how we treated tens and tens and thousands of people in remote care. Otherwise, no country in the world can afford to have those many patients in the hospital beds. So care away from the hospital will be the new way of treating patients in next. I'm not talking about next 10 years or 20 years. It's just it's given. It will be there in next few years to continue, and it will mature not just for simple diseases but also for other tertiary care serious diseases. I'll give you another example. We started moving patients after TKR within 3 days. It used to be 7 days. So what's happening is that TKR is like knee replacement, and we used to have physiotherapists doing 2 hours of physiotherapy in a day, and for the rest of 22 hours patient is just seeing the roof, nothing else. Okay, so why don't you send the patient home, send physiotherapist for 2 hours, morning, evening, whatever is the routine, and just imagine you are freeing a hospital bed. Patient is not having an infection, because hospitals are full of infection, whether Vedanta or a typical any other hospital. So your message is treatment away from the hospital is bound to stay. And whenever we talk about remote, it is digital. So digital is going to play an important role in healthcare industry. It is going to play an important role in all the industry, but I think healthcare is going to be probably taking a leap forward step in this particular journey.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful statement to end it on. The hospital is not only in your pocket, it's away from the hospital. Your treatment is at home and in your pocket. So